Hello, I hope you are all doing well today. This video is going to be a case study based on the information available to us about Bryan Kohberger through the affidavit of probable cause. Kohberger's movements before the crime. It's been alleged that Kohberger left his apartment at 2:44 a.m. and shut his phone off at 2:47 a.m. shortly after leaving. A vehicle thought to be Kohberger's is seen traveling towards SR 270 at 2:53 a.m. A vehicle consistent with the one he owns is seen on surveillance traveling westbound in the 700 block of Indian Hills Drive in Moscow, Idaho at 3:26 a.m. and then westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 at 3:28 a.m. He enters into the 1122 King Road home residential neighborhood at 3:29 a.m., but isn't believed to have entered the residence until 4 a.m. at the earliest. My conclusion: if you drive from Kohberger's apartment and go straight to 1122 King Road home, you wouldn't be first observed on camera driving westbound in the 700 block of the Indian Hills area unless you traveled further east. If Kohberger entered the Moscow area through Highway SR 270 and was seen traveling on 700 Indian Hills Drive before being spotted westbound on Steiner Avenue, this would mean that he would have had to travel at least 2 miles out of his way and still take the less practical 700 Indian Hills Drive instead of Steiner Avenue. Also, if you took a path from BK's apartment, used SR 270, and drove straight to 1122 King Road, this path would take you about 21 minutes. If Kohberger left at 2:44 a.m. and arrived in the 1122 King Road home neighborhood at 3:29, his trip would have taken him 45 minutes to complete. That's about 24 minutes longer than expected, which means Kohberger took a route that was roughly 24 minutes, give or take, out of his way, a route that took him miles further eastbound than if he had gone straight to 1122 King Road home. If these actions are accurate and Kohberger shut his phone off and took an unconventional route to 1122 King Road home, this would show that he attempted to cover his tracks and he left his apartment knowing he was going to commit a crime. He knew the location he was going to so well that he didn't need a GPS and he was able to take back roads to his destination. I believe he took an alternative route to throw any traces off of him, making it look like the perpetrator traveled to the home from a westbound location instead of an eastbound location, because the eastbound location would have been consistent with the perpetrator entering the area from Pullman, Washington. Also, he had the knowledge that police investigators can collect cell phone records from an area's service-providing cell tower and use those records to narrow down phone numbers that are not usually in the location, which can be used as a starting point for investigators to find possible people of interest. This also shows that he knew that police officers can trace a cell phone's approximate location. In conclusion, if Kohberger did what he is alleged to have done, I believe that shows a significant amount of planning, criminal apprehension knowledge, and shows that Kohberger had previous intent to commit these crimes. As Kohberger had at least 45 minutes to travel to 1122 King Road home, and in this time he never second-guessed what he was going to do, and most likely planned his actions out prior to November 13th, 2022. It's important to note that these times are approximations. The crime. Based on evidence gathered, investigators believe the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Due to the layout of the house, the location of suspect vehicle 1, and the exit the perpetrator later used, I'm led to believe that Kohberger most likely entered the 1122 King Road residence through the sliding glass door that leads to the kitchen. Due to the upstairs noises that woke DM up, I am led to believe he went upstairs shortly after entering the home. He possibly checked Kaylee's old room first for occupants. When he seen that no one was in the room, it's likely he checked the other rooms upstairs. When he opened the door to Madison's room, he was most likely met by Murphy, who could have been excited to see a person who was awake. Murphy being excited could also explain the noises that DM first mentions hearing. After realizing the dog was friendly and not wanting to hurt the dog, Kohberger could have coaxed Murphy into the other unoccupied room. Because DM first mentions noises consistent with Kaylee playing with her dog upstairs, we can determine that it is possible DM is connecting the dog barking on recording at 4:17 a.m. with the noises she heard upstairs, if the barks on recording were consistent with Murphy. It's also possible that the dog named Murphy, located in the home, never barked, as the dog barking is never mentioned other than in the audio recording, which arguably could have picked up the noises of a different dog. We know that Kaylee's dog Murphy is a well-socialized dog, not a guard dog or an aggressive dog. Murphy was also found by police in a separate room, which was later determined to be an odd location for him to be in. We could speculate the time he was locked in the unoccupied room could have been somewhere around 4:17 a.m. Although we know these camera timestamps could be slightly wrong, due to the time frame investigators believe these events occurred, were slightly inconsistent with the noise recording timestamps. If we adjust the time frame of the recordings to be more consistent with the time frame investigators give us, the whimpers heard on the recording occur at 4:27 a.m., which is most likely a reference taken from the recording's timestamp that could be off by at least 2 minutes, which means we can consider all recording times noted in this area of the investigation could have a possible time discrepancy, which means 2 minutes could be removed from the timestamp on the recording references to give us a more accurate time. If Murphy started barking, it would mean that he started to bark at about 4:15 a.m. Murphy's behavior and tendencies to bark could help the investigators come to a more time-accurate conclusion of Kohberger's movements in the house. I would assume that Murphy started barking after being distressed because he was locked in a room alone. Murphy could have also started barking as a reaction to the crying noises noted in the interaction between Zaina and the perpetrator. Since 4:15 a.m. wouldn't be the likely time the suspect entered the residence, and I don't think Murphy's barking would be triggered by the presence of a new person in the home, since he was used to being around new people.
I've asked and they won't give that answer. So.
And the dog going to the Humane Society.
Yeah, we do know that he wound up going there, but just where he was found in the home.
But I mean, could he have had blood on him?
Exactly.
That's the question. We don't know.
We'll never know.
Could he have jumped on
That
him
chain's
and
been broke.
scratched him, and because he was a jumper? Could that person have hair on him? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was he a barker?
Nope.
Not at all. Murphy was actually, he's still kind of a puppy. He just recently is turning one.
He'll be one on the 27th.
Yeah, so I mean, he was pretty young, and he was used to people, being around a lot. He lived with 5 girls.
Do you think if a stranger came in, he would have caused a ruckus?
No.
I don't believe so. I honestly think, if anything, he probably would have hid.
He was a big goofy dog.
Based on recordings and other factors, I would assume that Kohberger was upstairs in the house around 4:02 a.m., and that he most likely either went to Kaylee's room first, or somehow knew that the room was unoccupied before placing Murphy inside. Since Zaina is on TikTok till 4:12 a.m., we can assume that at this time, her concentration from the app was somehow broken, in a manner that would have caused her to close her phone to focus on the issue. This could be when DM hears someone say, "There's someone here." Due to a loud noise, footsteps, seeing someone walk by, or Murphy starting to bark, Zaina could have been alerted to the presence of an unknown person in the house. DM notes that after hearing someone say, "There's someone here," she opened her door and looked out her room. At this time, she did not see anyone, which means that if Zaina was the author of this statement, it's possible that at this time, Kohberger was already in the location of the hallway area leading to Zaina's room, or she was alerted to a noise and Kohberger was still upstairs. DM stated that she opened her bedroom door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying from Zaina's room. This statement leads me to believe that the crying noise that Zaina was making at this time was slightly quieter than the noises she would make a short time later, because the voice recording picks up a whimper and a thud at 4:27, or with time adjusted 4:25 a.m. The dog barking earlier was also caught on audio recording, but no screaming, clear words, or noises consistent with fighting. Soon after the crying that made DM open her bedroom door the second time, she heard more noises that made her open the door a third time. I would assume that this is the time when the whimpers and thud noise were caught on audio recording, time-stamped 4:27 a.m. DM observes the perpetrator dressed in all black and wearing a mask that covered his mouth and nose walking towards her. DM then observed the man walk towards the back sliding door. It's believed at this time he left the house. The lack of screaming by someone who is asleep is easily explained, but what about the lack of noise made by Zaina, who was definitely awake, and Ethan, who was possibly awake? What about the lack of noises consistent with someone fighting back? This leads me to believe that it is possible that Bryan Kohberger either committed these murders efficiently and quickly, or he brought a knife and a gun to the King Road home. It's most likely that Kohberger killed Ethan first, because the perpetrator would have considered Ethan the biggest threat to himself. The perpetrator attacking Ethan could have triggered a louder cry from Zaina before her death. The lack of screaming for help or fighting back could be explained by the use of a gun by Kohberger to control his victims. Due to my knowledge of true crime, I believe people are more likely to fight back or scream during a knife attack than being held at gunpoint. The time of the crying and thud noise being caught on recording coinciding with the perpetrator leaving the home and the lack of noises coming from his victims leads me to believe that Kohberger killed his victims with efficiency. Most likely, all the victims had severe wounds to their throat that would have incapacitated and quieted them quickly. Besides defense wounds or cuts made after the victims were delivered their fatal wound or wounds, I would not be surprised to find out that all victims had 1 or 2 lethal cuts to the throat and neck area. This leads me to believe that Kohberger had extensive knowledge of human anatomy, specifically pertaining to the throat and windpipe locations of the neck region. He could have also had prior experience with carrying out acts consistent with causing fatal wound delivery to the neck area, possibly on animals or previous victims. Crime scene walkthrough. The documenting officer of the crime scene walkthrough described in the affidavit of probable cause is Corporal Brett Payne of the Moscow Police Department, who describes arriving at the scene at 4 p.m. on November 13, 2022. Payne entered the King Road residence through the bottom floor door on the north side of the building. Payne and Officer Smith then walk upstairs to the second floor. Payne is directed down a hallway to the west bedroom on the second floor, which is determined to be Zaina Kernodle's room. Just before this room, there was a bathroom door on the south wall of the hallway. While approaching the room, he could see a body that was later identified as Zaina laying on the floor. Xana was deceased, with wounds that appeared to have been caused by an edged weapon. The male, later identified as Ethan Chapin, was also located deceased in the room, with wounds later determined by autopsy report county medical examiner to be caused by sharp force injuries. Based on this information, we can determine that if Xana was the author of the "there is someone here" statement, that during this time, she was most likely talking to Ethan, who wasn't heard responding to Xana's comment by DM. During this time, Ethan wasn't shown to have been using his phone, so it is likely that Ethan was in bed laying down and possibly sleeping at the time the perpetrator came into the room. There was also a good chance that when he realized there was a perpetrator in the room, there was little time for him to react before he was murdered. I would assume that at the time of his death, Ethan was still laying on the bed, since the audio recording only recorded one loud thud. The thud noise that was recorded after the crying noises is more consistent with a person hitting the floor or wall than hitting a bed. Since Xana was found on the floor, it is possible that she was either standing up, possibly sitting, or laying on the floor when the perpetrator came into the room. However, I believe that it is more likely that Xana was in the bed when the perpetrator walked in. It's possible that after the perpetrator attacked Ethan, Xana got up in an attempt to leave the room. By the time she was able to leave the room, Ethan was possibly immobile due to his wounds, and Xana was already nabbed by the perpetrator. If these events occurred, I would assume that this would be the point in time where the perpetrator said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," followed by Xana crying and a thud produced when Xana hit the floor from a standing position. These events would lead me to believe that a gun was not needed to control the victims or used to conduct any of these crimes. Payne is then led upstairs to the third floor of the residence. The third floor consists of 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The bedroom on the west side of the floor was later determined to be Kaylee's prior to her recently moving out of the house. Body camera footage showed that there was a dog in the room when Moscow police officers initially responded. The dog is named Murphy, and he belonged to Kaylee. Payne was then pointed towards a small bathroom on the east side of the third floor. This bathroom shared a wall with Madison Mogen's bedroom, which was situated on the southeast corner of the third floor. Payne entered this bedroom. When he did, he could see 2 females in a single bed in the room. Kaylee and Madison were deceased, with visible stab wounds to their bodies. Payne later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather sheath laying on the bed next to Madison's right side. I would assume that if the knife sheath was found on the bed next to Madison's right side, that Madison was laying on the right side of Kaylee. Otherwise, the knife would be described as being located between the 2 females. The presence of the knife sheath indicates to me that the perpetrator spent more time in this room than he needed to commit the murders. It's possible that the perpetrator sat on the bed or stood over the bed and leaned over one or both of the bodies to examine them or commit further acts to the bodies that went beyond committing the murders. The sheath was later processed and had K-Bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps' Eagle Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap of the knife. A latent footprint was also found outside of DM's bedroom. Due to the lack of evidence and the description of the perpetrator given to us by DM, I would assume that the perpetrator of these crimes came to the house prepared to commit murder. It is also likely that he took care to avoid blood transfer. Although we must keep in mind that descriptions of the initial crime scene walkthrough don't always contain all the evidence found at the crime scene. If this was Kohberger, the evidence at the scene shows that he is a very cruel and efficient murderer. It's believed by police officers that all of the actions he took during this crime took him 25 minutes or less to commit. How much time he spent with Kaylee and Madison and what he did was unknown, but I believe this information would give us a better understanding of his motive. I believe that the sheath being left at the scene and the placement of the sheath indicate that if Kohberger did have a targeted person, persons, room, or item, that his reason for being in the King Road house that night would be located in this area of the house. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it helps my channel grow, lets me know I'm doing a good job, and best of all, it's free.